Okay, the Seder. Okay, so everybody. So let's pick up from near the bottom of the amud, Daf Kafchet Amud Aleph. We were talking about this question of sharpening the knives, right? The Mishnah said, "Ein mashchizin, ein mashchizin et hasakin, b'yom tov aval masin al gabei chavata." The Mishnah said we cannot sharpen a knife on Yom Tov. As explained, this is primarily a weekday activity. Aval masin al gabei chavata, but you could rub it against another knife, right? In an unusual way. We saw discussions, qualifications in the Gemara. Is that referring to using another knife to sharpen it, or using another knife, rubbing it against it just to clean it? And we saw four different girsa'ot, four different explanations in terms of exactly how this work comes out. We'll just look again at the last one, because the last one was the most machmir. Right, so if you see near near the bottom of the page, right, Ika de Manila, maybe 6 lines from the bottom. The Ika de Manila Seifa. So those who had this qualifying statement of Rav Huna said it's relating to the Sefer of the Mishnah, which would mean he was talking about Avam Asyal Gabei Chavata, Amar Vidu Amar Shma Lo Shanu El Avir Sham Nunita, Aval Echadada Asur. In other words, he said, according to this version, that you would only be allowed to rub one knife against the other in order to clean it, right? To get rid of the fats or whatever that's attached to it. But even to do like that in order to sharpen it, you can't do. So in other words, according to that opinion, you could never sharpen the knife. Not only that, but using the sharpener, the grindstone, right? You could not use, certainly not to sharpen, and not even to use it to clean the knife. So the question now says the Gemara, we have 4 lines from the bottom, 5 lines from the bottom. Man Tana Tiv Mashchezet Asur. So who is this Tana who holds that you cannot use mashchezet at all? Rav Chisda the Loka Rabbi Yehuda says clearly. Says Rav Chisda, this is not. I don't know yet whose opinion it is, but it's not the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, right? Titnan. The Tanya, the Bach changes it to Titnan because it's a Mishnah. So Mishnah appears twice in Shas. Titnan ein ben Yom Tov l'Shabbat ela ochel nefesh bilvad. Okay, so we learn in the Mishnah that there is no difference between something we've said many times, no difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov, except for Ochel Nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda Matir Af Machshirei Ochel Nefesh. The Gemara in bed is going to explain exactly what the machloket between them is and how it's learned out. But Rabbi Yehuda says no, there's a difference. There is something else. Meaning Tanakama says the only difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov, and we should know, and the Gemara goes through all the Mishnah that talk about Ein Bein. In Masech Megillah, we have a whole series of Mishnayot that say there's no difference between A and B except for this, and then of course the Gemara goes and tells us there are other differences as well, right? What exactly is it coming to? But it's only a certain category that is coming to teach us. But it says there are no difference in terms of the melacha that you're allowed to do. All the melachot that are forbidden on Shabbat are going to be forbidden on Yom Tov as well, except for Ochel Nefesh. Says the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, not just Ochel Nefesh, even Machshirei Ochel Nefesh, meaning the preparatory stage before that. That would be allowed as well. I just have to mention, while we say this Mishnah, I'm not sure if we've mentioned it in this context before, but I heard on Rav Weiss explain. He says, you look at this Mishnah, it says, Ein men Shabbat, Ein men Yom Tov Shabbat, Ochel Nefesh Bilvad. He says there are 2 perushim on this Mishnah. One perush, which is given by the Gemara, and it's given by the Tosefta, and it's given by all the Rishonim, and it's given by all the Achronim, and it's given by all the Poskim, is exactly the way that we just explained. Ein ben Yom Tov, right? Ein ben Yom Tov Shabbat, Ochel Nefesh Bilvad. And then he says there is a second perush, which is the perush of Reb Zusha. Reb Zusha Vanipoli. So he says like this: Ein ben Yom Tov l'Shabbat ela ochel nefesh bilvad. What does that mean? He says the Rambam in Ilchot Yom Tov talks about Simchat Yom Tov. It's a well-known Rambam. He talks about the fact that on Yom Tov you have to invite to your table the poor and the those less fortunate. And he says if you don't, the widow, the orphan, etc. He says if you don't go and if you don't invite other people, you don't think about how you can give to others on Yom Tov at your table. So that is not Simchat Yom Tov. Says the Rambam in very famous and very harsh language. Says that is Simchat Kreiso. He says that is not the Simcha of Yom Tov. That's the Simcha of your stomach. Is it just about eating for yourself, or is it about eating and helping others and giving and sharing with others as well? So he says, therefore, you shouldn't eat on Yom Tov. When it comes to Yom Tov, you shouldn't eat by yourself, but you should think about others that are less fortunate. So we find that in that said in Yom Tov, we don't find it said on Shabbos. So it says Rav Zusha, he says, Ein ben Yom Tov Shabbat ochel nefesh bilvad. Ochel nefesh bilvad, you want to sit and eat by yourself? So okay, on Shabbat you can do that. On Yom Tov you shouldn't be able to. All right, it's a nice Chassidish avod. It's obviously not the pshat of the Mishnah. But in any event, so we said, Ein ben Yom Tov Shabbat ochel nefesh bilvad. Rabbi Yehuda matir af machshirei ochel nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed even machshirei ochel nefesh, and therefore it doesn't stand to reason that Rabbi Yehuda would be the one who would say that you can't chop. Sharpening the knife would be machshirei ochel nefesh. And Rabbi Yehuda seems to allow that. Why does he allow that? Where does he learn it from? So Rashi points out here, as I said, we'll see on amud bet in more detail. But Rashi points out here, the last line of the page, he says, Matir af machshirei ochel nefesh. It says, V'tama mishum de dalish ye'aseh lachem. Right, what does it mean, yaseh lachem? So Rabbi Yehuda is going to learn from that word lachem, lechol tzorchechem, for whatever you need, which includes machshirei ochel nefesh, includes the preparation beforehand. Fine. So that was so Rav Chisda says. So after Rav Chisda says that, so we have a bit of an interesting exchange now in the Gemara. It says, Amale Rava le Rav Chisda dashinan mishmech halachak Rabbi Yehuda. If that's the case, Rav Chisda, can we now say in your name the halacha follows Rabbi Yehuda? So he says, Amale hey Rava dechol ki hanei mile maliata tidoshun mishamai. He says certainly. He says all sorts of things like that. You can say in my name, to say in my name that it's the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. So of course, you can say that. Okay. So now to the last line of the page. Now we have a few stories that cases like this, with sharpening the knife and similar things to do with machshirei ochel nefesh on Yom Tov. Amar Rav Nechemia, brother of Yosef. Nechemia, son of Rav Yosef, says as follows: Hava kaimna kamei de Rava. We were sitting before Rava, and we saw v'hava ka over the page. V'hava ka ma'aval lesakina apuma de dikula. So we saw that he was taking the knife and he was rubbing the knife against the puma, against the rim of this of a basket, right? Ma'aval sakina apuma de dikula, says Rashi, mishafshef sakin al piasal. He was rubbing the knife against the basket. Again, everything we've been talking about until now, essentially you take the knife against whatever other object and you rub it against it, right? Now the whole question is, are you rubbing it in order to sharpen the knife, or are you doing it in order to get rid of the fat, right? To clean the knife. And we saw different opinions, different requirements as to when you're allowed to do that, whether it's on a mashchezet, or etz, or even, etc. So here he was rubbing the knife against the basket. So we asked him, Lechadeda ka'avid ma'al, or la'avil shamnunita? Said, are you doing this in order to try and sharpen the knife? Or are you doing it, right? This is on Yom Tov, obviously. Are you doing this in order to sharpen the knife, or are you doing it in order to clean it? V'amarli la'avil shamnunita. So he said, I'm doing it in order to clean, in order to get rid of the fat that's on it. So continues Rav Nechemia, he says, that's what he told me. But I could see the way he was doing it. He wasn't doing it just to clean the knife. He was trying to sharpen the knife. So why did he tell me that? On says kasava halacha ve'ein morin kain. Okay, very, very interesting. As I mentioned this yesterday, very interesting concept that we have in halacha. Right nowadays, it's always. But particularly nowadays, it's hard to find exactly the practical expression of this. What does it mean when we say halacha ve'ein morin kain? Meaning that's the halacha. The halacha is that you're allowed to, but you shouldn't really, you shouldn't teach it in public because people are going to get confused. People are going to make a mistake. Meaning really it's mutar, but we don't want to tell that to the masses. So therefore, when he was sharpening the knife, he was rubbing this knife against the basket. He was doing it in order to sharpen it. And they asked Rabbi, they said, are you sharpening the knife? He said, no, I'm not sharpening the knife. He knew that it was mutar, but it's halacha ve'ein morin kain. So says Rashi over here, halacha. It says, Rabbi Yehuda, halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda, mutar kol ish lasot, and this would really be, by right, this would be allowed for everybody. Aval ein morin la'rabin kem. but we don't teach it, we don't publicize it like that. Shelo yizalzelu af b'she'efshar lasoto mibod yom. Because we don't want people to come and be mezalzel, we don't want people to regard it disparagingly and to make light of it, even when what? Af b'she'efshar lasoto mibod yom, when you could have done it before Yom Tov. In other words, that which Rabbi Yehuda now comes along and says machshirei ochel nefesh is mutar, not so fast. We're going to see this later on. But when does he say machshirei ochel nefesh mutar? Okay, he says the continues Rashi the Kohen, the Sharina, and all these which we're going to say is allowed. Kegon shenitz kalkalu b'yom tov. If, for example, the item that you're fixing, which machshirei ochel nefesh, is broke on Yom Tov. Or shayat motarud, or on Erev Yom Tov you were tarud, for whatever reason you didn't have time. Kedamrin la command lo itir Rabbi Yehuda ela b'machshirin she'i efshar lasotan me'elev Yom Tov. So Rabbi Yehuda is not giving a complete blanket heter. He's saying machshirei ochel nefesh, which could not be performed on Erev Yom Tov, those can be performed on Yom Tov. So now you can come along and do everything on Yom Tov. Machshirei ochel nefesh are allowed, but only if you couldn't do them before. Now it's interesting. The Gemara makes this distinction. The Gemara makes this distinction between efshar lasoto mibod yom le'i efshar lasoto mibod yom regarding machshirei ochel nefesh. And based on that, so many of the Rishonim learn that when it comes to ochel nefesh itself, because we all know, we've been learning Masechet Beitza for a long time, so we know clearly there are certain melachot of ochel nefesh which we will not allow to be done on Yom Tov. What's the distinction? When do we say ochel nefesh is allowed on Yom Tov? When do we say ochel nefesh is not allowed on Yom Tov? So there are different explanations which are brought. But one of the most common explanations in the Rishonim is efshar lasoto mibod yom or efshar lasoto mibod yom. Meaning, if it is a melacha v'achal nefesh that could have been done, and I think we saw this, the Shulchan Aruch, the very first siman of Echad Yom Tov in Taf Tzadi Hey, I believe it is, over there, Shulchan Aruch, and the Mishnah Berurah talks about it. If it's a melacha that could have been done before Yom Tov, so then you can't do it on Yom Tov. If you couldn't have done it before Yom Tov, then you can do it. Okay, and where does that distinction come from? We don't find that distinction in the Gemara anywhere regarding ochel nefesh itself. We do find it regarding machshirei ochel nefesh. So we should extrapolate from there. This would be the case by ochel nefesh as well. But certainly for machshirei ochel nefesh, okay, which is only Rabbi Yehuda who allows it, but what Rabbi Yehuda allows is only that which you could not have done from before Yom Tov. So therefore, he says regarding this sharpening the knife, so why is it halacha the ein morin ken? Why do we not teach it publicly? Why don't we teach the message? Because the minute that you'll teach that machshirei ochel nefesh is allowed, people will think you mean to say any machshirei ochel nefesh. The one understands only machshirei ochel nefesh that could not be done before Yom Tov. Okay, you could ask why this is different. Why this is different to any other area? Why it's different to ochel nefesh itself? But for whatever reason, the Gemara says that this is halacha ve'ein morin. Okay, next case. So 5 lines down. V'amar Abaye. Abaye says like this. We're on right. I'm on bet 5 lines down. Amar Abaye. Hava kamina kamei demar. I was sitting before Mar, right? And I said to him, V'hava kamaval sakina asifta derechaya. He was this time he was rubbing the knife on the rechaim, or on the millstone. Said, are you trying to sharpen the knife, or are you trying to clean the knife? Again, he said, I was doing it in order to clean the knife. And I could see again that he was doing it in order to sharpen it. Okay, so they say so the same reason it was because halacha ve'morin. So now we ask a related question. That's regarding sharpening the knife. That could be a kitchen knife that you used to cut up meat or whatever. So now we ask the question. Okay, we had a long discussion beforehand about whether you're allowed to show your bechor to a chacham on Yom Tov, right? You remember? But now the question is, could you take the knife of shchita, and the halacha is the knife has to be perfectly sharp, right? Can't have any dents in it. When you use the knife a lot, so it can, especially in those days, I think that nowadays, again, with the materials that we have, so the knives are a lot smoother. But you have to show every now and again. You have to show the knife to the chacham. You have to check it in order to know if the shechita is going to be kosher or not. So therefore, can you do this on Yom Tov? Are you allowed to show the knives to the chacham by Yom Tov? So Rav Mari Brei de Rav Bizna Shali v'Rabanan Asli. So we have three opinions. Opinion number one is: are you allowed to go and show the knife to the knife of shchita to the chacham on Yom Tov? Opinion number one we said is mutar. Opinion number two says asur. Opinion number three says if you have a talmid chacham, so he can check the knife for himself, and then he can give the knife to other people. In other words, that fits in with this concept of we're saying halacha ve'ein morin kain. The talmid chacham knows he can do it for himself, but we don't want to go. We don't want to tell other people to. So let's see Rashi. Rashi says Maula hatabach sakin lachacham. By the way, nowadays it usually happens that the chacham and the shochet is the same person, right? Nowadays, normally the person who's the expert in checking the knife is the one who is doing the shechita himself. But it wasn't always that way. So Maula hatabach sakin lachacham b'yom tov livdok. Is the shochet allowed to go and show the knife to the chacham on Yom Tov to check it? שהטילו חכמים על הטבחים להראות סכין לחכם קודם שישחוט שום בהמה. חכמים said they have to go and show the knives to the חכם before they do any שחיטה. ומה לעשות כן ביום טוב? Can you do that on יום טוב? מי מחזיק עובדה דחור? דאב שהמילתא שלתו למכור בת ליז, או לא מכניס. Why would you not be allowed to do it? Are you allowed to go and do it on Yom Tov? Do we say that this appears like uvdin dechol? Do we say this appears like a weekday activity? Why? The avshamilta. Avshamilta means the matter becomes known. It's a difficult word to translate, but we use it often in the context of machines and things that make a noise. On Shabbat, there's a certain zilzul, there's a certain something disparaging that's going to come to Shabbat. So in this case, it's not that anything is going to make a noise, but it means that the matter is going to become known. People are going to talk about it. People are going to hear about it. And people are going to see. Why is he checking the knife? Why does he want to do the shechita? Because he wants to go. He's a butcher and he's going to go and kill these animals so he can go and sell them. So then that becomes part of an uvda dechol, preparation for going to sell the animal. Right? Do we say no? We're not concerned. Not concerned about that. So we said the opinion that said that the third opinion was the chacham or el atzmo beveito. Sakin shelo delav shamelta. If he's at home and he's looking at his own knife, okay, no, that's not a problem. No one's going to say anything from that. Now, back in the Gemara, Amar Rav Yosef, sakin she'amda mutar lechadada b'yom tov. A knife that stood. What does it mean? A knife that stood? Says Rashi, she'amda mechalifut shela, meaning it's lost its sharpness. She'ena chotechet yafeh. It does not cut well anymore. Avalon ifgema. Okay, but it's not completely blunt. I mean, you could still use it. It's just not as sharp. So there we say Marav Yosef that you'd be allowed, that you would be allowed to sharpen on Yom Tov. Rashi, mutar lechadada b'yom tov, ve'af agav deme'etmol u'mishilshom hitchila lekalkel v'leilech. Even though, right, it doesn't just start now becoming blunter and losing its sharpness. It's the process. It takes a few days. But it was still, you didn't have to worry about that yesterday. He thought he wouldn't need it. But if it was already blunt from yesterday, so no, you can't, then you should have fixed it before Yom Tov. Okay, so says the Gemara, so that which we said, you're allowed to now go and show. Meaning still b'tchak, you can still come along and you can still cut it. You can still cut using it. But if it's if you can't cut with it at all, Rashi says, right? If it doesn't cut at all, to now go and sharpen it. That you're not going to be allowed to do at all on Yom Tov because that's too much tirch. Okay. Now, so we get into sort of a summary or a group of different activities that are related to Machshrei Ochel Nefesh. Darash Rav Chisda v'tei Rav Yosef. Echad sakin shenifkema. ואחד שיפוט שנרצם, ואחד גליפת תנור וכלאיים ביום טוב, באנו למחלוקת רבי יהודה ורבנן. Okay, in these three cases, these are going to be three cases of machshirei ochel nefesh, three examples, and all of these are going to be the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim. So whether it is, so Rav Chisda says, and some say it was Rav Yosef who said it, whether we have echad sakin shenifkema, we have a knife which has become blunted, right? Or it can be a knife of shkita, and in truth it could be any knife that you want to come and sharpen. That is number one. The second one is shipud, echad shipud sheniltzam. So you have a shipud which you would use to roast meat or whatever, and the shipud itself is lost its shape. It's lost the shape of its right. You can't place the meat on it anymore. And cleaning out or sweeping out the oven on Yom Tov from all the dirt, whatever that is inside it. So in all these things, says the Gemara, it says Banan Machloket Rabbi Yehuda Rabbanan. Titania. What's the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan? We've already alluded to it. Titania ein ben Yom Tov l'Shabbat ela ochel nefesh bilvad. Rabbi Yehuda matir af machshirei ochel nefesh. That's what I say in the Mishnah. We said there is no difference between Shabbat and Yom Tov except for ochel nefesh. However, Rabbi Yehuda says Rabbi Yehuda matir af machshirei ochel nefesh. Rabbi Yehuda allows ochel nefesh as well. So now the Gemara, my tama to Tanakama. That's the machloket. What's between them? Why do they each paskin differently like that? So my tama Tanakama malka hu levado yaseh lachem. Right, the most famous pasuk of Ilchot Yom Tov, pasuk says, "Kom lacha lo yaseh ba'eh." Or I'll read the full pasuk. Right, so Pashat Bo. So Bayom Harishon Mikra Kodesh, Ubiyom Hashvi Mikra Kodesh. Over there, it's talking about Pesach. Right, the first day and the last day, but it applies to all the Yamim Tovim as well. What we're going to see, Yelachem kol melacha lo yaseh bahem. No melacha shall be done on them. Ach asher yeachel lachol nefesh hu levado yaseh lachem. Right, ach asher yeachel lachol nefesh. From there we learn that it's referring to ochel nefesh. Hu levado yaseh lachem. Only that will be performed. That is the melacha which is allowed. So how do we learn the pasuk? That is exactly is going to be the machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim. The Tanakama Amalkra Hu levado yaseh lachem. Hu levado yaseh lachem. Right? What should be done? Who? Who velo machshir rav. We've just referred to ochel nefesh. We're saying that is what is allowed. That's what you can perform. You can perform the ochel nefesh itself, but not its machshir rav. Rabbi Yehuda Amalkra lachem. Okay, so Tanakama focuses on the fact that it says Hu levado. Rabbi Yehuda focuses on the fact that it says Hu levado yaseh lachem. Lachem means whatever you need. Lachem lechol tzorchechem. For whatever you for whatever you need. Now, that's very nice, but the problem is that Rabbi Yehuda and Tanakama are learning from the same pasuk. Meaning Tanakama's pasuk also says lachem, and Rabbi Yehuda's pasuk also says Hu. So how did they resolve that? Says the Gemara now, Tanakama haktiv lachem. Okay, it also says the Tanakama's the pasuk still says lachem. What do you learn from that? So Tanakama would say to you the following: How lachem v'lo nochrim. That's coming to teach you. We saw this earlier. That said lachem v'lo nochrim, lachem v'lo leklavim, etc. Meaning that it's for you. It's not. I don't learn from lachem that you can do whatever you want in Yom Tov. I learn that lachem, the ochel nefesh is allowed. When is ochel nefesh allowed? It's allowed when it's for your purposes. But if it's for somebody non-Jewish, for example, somebody who's not commanded in Yom Tov, so if somebody's not commanded in Yom Tov, then there's no heter to cook for them in Yom Tov either. So that's lachem v'lo nochrim. Ashav ve'idach, and the other one, I for Rabbi Yehuda, nami ha'aktiv hu. Okay, so how would Rabbi Yehuda learn? Meaning it also says hu levado, right? So amalacha ktivu ktiv lachem. So Rabbi Yehuda would say no. It says hu, but it also says lachem, meaning it says hu to exclude, and it says lachem to include. Velo kasha. So he says there's no difficulty. This is how Rabbi Yehuda would learn it. He says kan במכשירים שאפשר לעשותן מערב יום טוב, כאן מכשירים שאי אפשר לעשותן מערב יום טוב. Okay, that's the distinction. Says Rabbi Yehuda, when the pasuk says who means only this you can do and nothing else, meaning only, it's implying you can only do achal nefesh and not machshirei achal nefesh, that's coming to exclude, yes, Rabbi Yehuda says, I agree, it's coming to exclude machshirei achal nefesh. But which machshirei achal nefesh? Those which could be performed before Yom Tov. But when it comes to lachem, lachem comes to include machshirei achal nefesh that could not be performed before Yom Tov. Okay, according to Tanakama, no, lachem comes to exclude lachem v'lo nochrim, or maybe as we saw machloket before, and lachem v'lo nochrim, or lachem v'lo klavim, whatever it is, to exclude those where you, those cases where you cannot perform achal nefesh, but it does not come to include machshirei achal nefesh itself. So that is the machloket that we have between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim. Okay, we'll stop there. And that is the end of our shiur for now, for the summer break. Everybody has about a month and a half to do Chazara on the whole first 2/3 of the Masechet.
Can I ask you a quick question on this? A quick question on the lechem. I just, I'm living on a moshav where everyone is kitzoni, and the Sephardic Rav of the moshav started screaming that you can't have non-Jews at your Leila Seder. And he was referring to elderly people who have helpers. He says, absolutely forbidden. Would this be the makor of his source? Because you're doing work of ochel nefesh. I couldn't understand it, but where he was coming from.
No, so we saw earlier on the Masechet, if you go back and you look at Daf Kaf Bet, so there is a sugya that talks about lachem that says that we are not allowed to invite, and it says mezamnim tanochri b'Shabbat, ve'em mezamnim tanochri b'Yom Tov. You can invite a non-Jew to your Shabbos table, but you can't invite them to your Yom Tov table. Why? Because there's the gzera shemeyabeh b'shvilo. Because you're worried that inadvertently you may come to cook, or advertently, you may come to cook for the non-Jew. You're not allowed to cook for them on Yom Tov because they are not included in the mitzvah of Yom Tov, and therefore it's not by them. Okay, in practical terms, there are a number of leniencies, and if you would ask me, I would say somebody who has certainly somebody who has a helper, an aide who's not Jewish. There are good reasons to allow them to be at your, many good reasons, which we won't get into now. But it is sound to have them.
I'm just curious where it was coming from.
Okay, but it's based on that. It's based on that Gemara.
Okay, great summer to everybody.
All right, have a good day. Have a good summer, everyone.
See you on Tisha B'Av, Bezrat Hashem.
Yes.
Wow.
Hello. Right. Saying hello now. I can't say
right, exactly. We won't greet you then.
That's true. You got me there. You're right. I won't say hello. All right. Kol tuv. Bye. Thanks.